Hello, listener. Hello, and welcome to the next in my series of Mindful Meets. If you've listened to any of my other Mindful Meets, you know that these are very informal conversations where I chat to people who spend their professional life helping others. And that will be in a number of different ways. And we draw some parallels between their work and my work. But the aim of it being to bring some awareness and some understanding to you and to help you to perhaps help yourself if that's an appropriate outcome. But in any case, to enjoy the conversations that I have. And today I am delighted to welcome Tom Cleary. Tom, you are very welcome to the podcast. Hello.
Thank you for having me here. I love what you're doing, Laurie, so thank you for inviting me along.
Oh, pleasure. You see, he's so nice already. This is going to be a great chat. And let me tell you a little bit about Tom, and then I'll hand over to Tom and he can talk about himself and fill you in a little bit more. So Tom is a wellbeing training specialist, and he works in a number of ways to impact people in a positive way. Originally professionally trained in psychology, but that's really only a tiny bit of how he touches people and improves their lives and their well-being. So Tom, let's start with an overview, I guess, of where you are now and what your work looks like and the kind of improvement, impact, help that you like to bring people.
Yeah, sure. I would say that I live, sleep, eat, and breathe well-being. It's something which, because of how I got into which I'll go on to later, I'm very passionate about, and most of my work these days is about creating and leading training courses and programs and workshops for businesses and charities and organizations on how their staff and they as a whole can actually work together to improve their well-being, but also hopefully beyond that impact society in a good way as well. So I'm a bit of a geek, I will say. I'm covered by kind of training papers and piles of books most of the time. And for me, it's about taking a teaching background, which I've got, into how can I get some information across to a group in a way which is not just, oh, that's interesting, but that's something I can actually use and apply in my real life.
And do you think that there is a greater need in the workplace for that kind of training, or is it both? Is it that organizations are just more aware that actually this is an important part of an holistic approach to how they look after their people?
I think it's both. So I've done a lot of one-to-one work in the past as well, and it's more for me because I really enjoy working with groups of people. I enjoy people making connections and sharing experiences. But I think there is a great need for people from all kind of different places and parts, both in and out of work, to look at well-being. I think that one of the reasons for me about the focus on workplaces is because since COVID hit, there's been an increased awareness, and I've got some clients who will, so very large companies who will admit they've never done anything at all really with well-being until lockdown 3 hit, and they went, oh, maybe we have to do something because we're now seeing the impact on our staff.
Yes. So you go in and you will, I guess, run training sessions that are specifically to highlight targeted areas, or is it sometimes that you have to start at quite a base level because there's very little happening in an organization?
Yeah, real mixture. So sometimes you have companies who are really on the ball. They will measure well-being continuously and they understand where the gaps are and they will ask for something very specific. So, for example, a big one last year was companies looking at male mental health and well-being. So there were lots of people saying we've done a lot of work in general. We've raised the basic awareness, but we know we've got some gaps here or lack of engagement here. Sometimes people will say we're not quite sure where to start, and I'll help them build a questionnaire to understand where they are. And it's really basic awareness training and also stigma removal, because there's no point in doing training on mental health and well-being if people in the company will see those words and go, oh, not for me, which you do get sometimes.
Yes, that must be quite interesting because there's a level of confidence, isn't there, required to say, oh, I'm going to attend this workshop on mental health. What does that what does that mean that I might be saying to other people that they might not know about me? And that's, I can imagine that might be quite tricky for some people to do.
It definitely is. The language is something which evolves so much depending on who I'm talking to.
Mm.
Excuse me. And even with some topics which I love, so I like human connection and the impact of isolation and loneliness. And you can, in some companies or with some people, you can lead with words like loneliness because it does grab people. Other times you'll get people going, well, I would never want to admit to being lonely because that seems a personal feeling, even though most of the time it's not at all.
Mm.
So you do have to think about what will be a safe topic to bring people in, I think, under.
Yes, 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 quite. And then is it a little bit difficult to measure the impact of a workshop like that? Whereas if you're doing PowerPoint training, for example, you know that somebody is able to then use PowerPoint or not. Whereas this, I imagine, I don't know, is a little bit more difficult.
It depends on what you're trying to measure. So, if, for example, it's awareness building, you can measure how much somebody knew before and after a course. If it's to do with building confidence in somebody looking after their own well-being or looking after a team that they line manage, for example, again, you can measure confidence and you can tie it into sort of key indicators within an organization as well in terms of are retention rates improving, is there less presenteeism, absenteeism, things like that. So you can measure in different ways, but sometimes with the general ones it's often a kind of measuring that's a human side. It's how are people reporting happiness levels, how people feeling about their engagement and being productive and feeling that their role actually brings something positive to them. So it sounds woolly, but actually those are so shown to have an impact on people's lives hugely. So measuring them can be quite effective.
Yes, and I often find that when I work with my clients, there are lots of external factors that contribute to somebody's difficulty in managing their own relationship with food, their own eating behavior. And if I could wave a magic wand and make their workplaces more comfortable for them, less stressful, more valuable in terms of how they are valued and how they value their role within them, I'm convinced that would help them then be able to feel more empowered and feel more confident to be able to find a better life for themselves around the food, because it does have all these things are inextricably linked, aren't they, and have a very strong crossover. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more with that, Laurie. Just sorry, it's
yeah.
for my own clients I've worked with who sometimes it does become a coping technique to use food in certain ways, but also for me, so I've got a background of eating disorders, and I know for me that the workplace has a huge impact in terms of, for example, I would rarely eat during work. And I think being a teacher before and a school leader, there was very little time to actually eat. You were maybe grabbing a sandwich while running to sort out something on the playground. And then I wouldn't want to eat around people sometimes, but then you got really hungry when you got back from work and you got out of that sync. But also people, including me, who when you've had maybe a stressful working environment or something there is kind of continuously difficult, it's coming home and going, well, the comfort for me now is going to be some form of food, because that's the way of either having that transition period between work and non-work, or it's that comfort and reassurance part of it. So I completely agree. Work can be a huge factor on eating.
Yes, you very kindly shared with us then about your own relationship with food, and I do want to talk about your wider story, but since that's come up at this point, what would you like to perhaps share with people listening that you think might be helpful around your experience and the journey that you had, and what perhaps led to it, if that's relevant, but sort of how you found your way, how you navigated your way through it?
Yeah, sure. It's something which I'm getting used to talking about still, I think. So I by going through support which I've had the last few years, I've been able to reflect back on when it started and where it's come from. And things that never really occurred to me back at that point. For example, I can remember when I was about very young, maybe 6 years old, that I was a very fussy eater, and I was taken to the GP, and the GP's comment, which is still stuck in my head, is, well, he's not going to starve, is he? And I was like, okay, I'm a bit podgy, I know that, but that really kind of hit home.
Wow,
And
at age 6.
yes,
And that's still in your head now. And
hugely.
So as I think you know, and some people listening might also know, that part of the work that I do is we always do a back food story. We do a lifeline and we look at messages. Was there something that somebody said? Was there something that was going on in the home? What were meal times like? What was school like? And it's incredible. Here you are, fully formed, intelligent, adult, grown up, mature man, and that little boy of 6 is still got that message.
No, absolutely. And I think I've always had a kind of odd relationship with food. I've always been a very fussy eater. So things like textures of food are really important to me, which meant I went down sort of certain routes. But it's also a comfort and a reward thing. So I've always had that kind of really quite strong relationship. And I've always loved watching cooking shows. So it's been something where even to this day, I will watch Delia or Nigella, just for fun. That's a way of me switching off. But I would say it's always been quite an uncomfortable relationship with food, and I would always avoid eating with people I didn't know very well. For example, I would eat very little during the day, and then I would have enormous amounts when I got home. And I was diagnosed several years ago, originally with binge eating disorder, by somebody who, with the best intentions, had no idea what to say to me or where to direct me to, apart from here's a leaflet. And it was a couple of years after that I went back to the GP and they said, I had to push them for referral to some professional support. And huge waiting list, because again, due to COVID, there's been expansion on the waiting lists. And after a few months, spoke to somebody and had a very long kind of consultation with them. And they said, we think actually it's bulimia, which for me, even though I knew about bulimia, didn't make sense until they explained the compensatory behavior I was doing. So I was restricting food rather than sort of getting rid of food in different ways. So that was an eye opener. And it's been kind of working out and working with people on how do I undo some of those unhealthy habits and, do it differently, I suppose.
Yes. So how long was the binge eating behavior going on before you sought help? And I'm going to put my hand up here and say mine was about 38 years. So, let's just get that out there.
I genuinely don't know if I can remember a time when it wasn't there, because even as a child, if there was an opportunity to have a large amount of food and do that knowing I wasn't supposed to be doing that, I would always be in secret. I wouldn't be, and teenager all the way through that, I can't remember when it wasn't there, if I'm honest.
Yeah. But it takes the time, doesn't it? Sometimes it takes people a long time to accept that this isn't normal, air quotes normal, but that it is something that we don't want to live with. Then we get to that point and then we might think, oh, well, maybe if I try this diet, or maybe if I don't eat carbs, or maybe if I do keto, that might help the behavior.
Tried them all.
Well, exactly. Yes. Got the t-shirt, got everything matching, got the mug, the key ring, everything. But that's all we see. That's all we're given, isn't it? And we don't know that other avenues exist. So it does take a long time to confirm it to ourselves, and then to confirm that we need help, and then to find the help, and then to actually have the confidence to go down that road.
It does. And it's one of those weird things where you think, well, I haven't told anyone, so maybe everyone's doing it behind closed doors as well, and maybe it is normal. And actually, it's only in the last probably year or so I've asked some really close friends, well, hold on, would you consider what I've just done to be normal? So I've been at home by myself, I've just eaten all of this. Where does that sit on your level of normalness? And some of them will say, yeah, no, occasionally. Some people are like, oh, I'd never do that. And it's really eye-opening to know what it looks like. But the reaching out for help bit, I think I think it's really hard to do, and it's something which, especially as somebody who's male with an eating disorder, there's nowhere near enough that's talked about with that, or that you feel comfortable going, oh, this can affect me. Because
Mm.
normally, and I do a lot of work in the work I do on stereotypes and assumptions about who gets which condition. So if you ask somebody, think about PTSD, for example, who do they picture? It's normally a male person in the armed forces. If you ask
Mm.
somebody about eating disorder, it's normally a young female. So you get that stereotype, and even though you know that's not the case, it does form a barrier about where do I go and who do I talk to. And
Yes,
then when
because
you
if I don't
do,
fit in that, then
yeah,
I'm a minority, therefore that's not meant for me.
yeah. And
Yeah.
when you build that courage up and you finally do go and talk to a GP, most of them, and there are some amazing ones out there, but the ones I know always say how little training they get on things like this. When you come to a professional, it's taking you a lot to get there, and they say, "Oh, it'll be fine. Have a leaflet. I'm not quite sure what to do with you." You go, "Oh, I'm sorry to waste your time," and you scuttle back for maybe, well, in my case, for years again. And it was other places which gave me confidence to come back and actually challenge it a little bit.
And of course, partly because that's what your subconscious mind wants you to do anyway.
Mm.
Because as we know, with our psychology backgrounds, that actually it's all about keeping us safe and actually confronting this behavior and going through the change and actually getting help and doing something differently is actually quite hard, and we'd rather run away from it, wouldn't we? So actually, if somebody isn't open to helping us, the mind's going to go, oh yeah, that's okay, we'll just go back to what we do. It's been
Back
fine.
to safety. Yeah,
It's been fine for 30 years. I don't know what the fuss is about. Kind of thing.
exactly that. Yes.
Yeah. And it's, yes, and then, as I'm really keen to try and connect with those parts of society that don't feel that the work that I do and that eating disordered eating help is for them. And it's hard, isn't it? Because all the big public messages, as you say, actually make a big nod to those stereotypical approaches. But yeah, so I wonder, is there something also around male thinking that says, in general, I am a man if I identify with being a man, but that is my gender, and therefore I'm not supposed to ask for help. I'm not supposed to cry. What is it? Real men don't eat quiche. All of this kind of stuff that's around.
The short answer to that is yes. I'm always hesitant to because we say men or we say women, and within that group, it's enormous. And the training I was doing, especially in November last year, around International Men's Day, a lot of people thought, oh, we'd be doing something really specific here and targeted because we're doing men's mental health. And I went, well, no, because that's an enormous group of ages and viewpoints and experiences and everything else in there. So I'm always careful with that. However, what the data says a lot is that men don't seek support. So if you talk about going to a pharmacist, going to a GP, men in general, the research says, are far less likely to go and get support. And they're also less likely to be proactive. So it'll be only when it actually can't be denied anymore, it's an emergency level, then going to get something. There's also that cultural experience of, as you said, boys don't cry, men don't do this, where there's an expectation of gender roles, which I think is thankfully morphing and changing and being challenged. But I have a lot of male clients. My client base used to be, for my one-to-one work, almost exclusively female. If I had one male in about sort of 6 months, that was wow, I've got a male client. Whereas now 95% of my one-to-one clients are male. And when you talk to them, even though they can say, look, I know it's not the case, but I still have this sort of hangover of I'm supposed to be like this, and actually I'm supposed to be strong enough not to have to get help, or I want to support my family or my colleagues, and actually I shouldn't feel I'm sort of a weak person for wanting help. There is still, sadly, a massive sort of gender overhang in terms of men getting help for things, and even more so for conditions which have historically been seen as sort of female in whatever form that takes.
Mm, mm. And as you were talking, I was also thinking that the element of body image, which is something that comes into my work a lot, because a negative body image drives the eating behavior, because the eating behavior then we think is going to produce the body that we want, that is going to make us happy. And of course it's a much broader issue than a number on the scale or a size trousers that we're going to be buying and all of that. And but I would imagine that if you ask most people, they would assume in a similar way that body image issues are predominantly female, or in fact that it just doesn't really occur particularly to men. What would you say to that?
It's something which fascinates me because there's a real split going on here in terms of there's a message going out that and I hate the phrase, but I'm using it on purpose because it's used. Real men don't worry about the way that they look. So if you're worrying about that, somehow you're not living up to being the gender that you are. But on the other hand, you've got, on social media especially and advertising, you have this look about men look like this, which is continuously shown. And then you're thinking, well, hold on, I can't worry about it, but I'm meant to look like that. And if I don't, then I'm failing. That's a really hard place to be in, because then again, having to say, I worry about the way that I look. I worry when I hear about, get summer ready. Throughout the year at this point, I think you can see things like this going on, or fitness influencers talking about the size of your bicep, or how much stomach you've got. It's huge. So I think there's an underestimation about the impact on men, about the way that they see themselves and their body image. And I think that it's being made harder by, not always, again, it's changing, but there is some messaging still out there about we're not meant to care about it. That's a female thing to worry about what we look like. It's not at all. It really isn't.
Yes. I mean, I remember that when I was growing up, there were probably adverts just about shaving, perhaps, and then the whole male grooming thing's now taken on. I'm going, yeah, and this is, of course, because actually, if we break that down, wanting to look after yourself and wanting to have pride in your appearance is about self-respect, it's about self-esteem, it's about confidence, and it's quite a and actually one can actually fuel the other, can't it? So when I'm trying to help somebody feel better about themselves, one of the first things that we do is self-care, and to take time, not because you've already done the ironing, not because you've done a really good day's work, in fact, not because you deserve it at all, just because you are you, and that is enough reason, that you're worth it. So it's good that things are changing, and that sort of grooming is advertised a little more than perhaps it was in the 80s.
I think that mindset, though, is still really lacking. And for the majority of people who I come across, whether it's through workshops or one-to-ones or groups or whatever it might be, who are often extremely caring and considerate people, they want to look after their families or their friends or their colleagues or their teammates or whatever it is, taking care of themselves is way, way, way back. So I don't look at self-compassion in terms of the impact that has. And even that phrase self-compassion sounds really woolly, and I have to show how Olympic athletes and business leaders are using it in a very successful way, but it is missing. And then the male grooming thing, that was really eye-opening in November, because I chose a different set of adverts and references to show as part of a training. And I would ask people, would you only go and buy a shower gel which looks a certain way? And the conversation was really fascinating. So a few people said things like, well, even though my wife's got one in the shower, which is actually, it smells nicer, it feels better, and everything about it I prefer, I feel weird using it even by myself because it's not for men. And then one person said, well, I wouldn't buy the for men one. I showed I think it's a Dove for Men deodorant. He went, I couldn't, what if my mate saw me buying that deodorant? What would they think about me? And it was really interesting how even with in theory, male specific products, there was still this fear about, will I be judged for buying certain things, which in my head are somehow still linked to someone who's
Yeah.
not me. It's a really interesting topic, the whole thing, I think.
Yes, yes. So back a little bit to the top of the conversation when I just introduced you. So give us an idea of your route to where you are now, and what sort of drove you to be doing this work.
Yep, sure. I would call quite a varied history in terms of I did psychology. I chose to do my dissertation in falling in love because I find human connection really fascinating.
Did
I then
you? Oh
I
my
did
goodness,
I
that
loved it.
sounds like a whole podcast on its own, actually.
Well, I then took the theory and put it into real life. I ran a dating agency for many, many years. So matching people up and finding out why they felt the way they did. But after a few years, I had built to a point where I was doing all the I was by myself the whole time. The people doing the fun bit with my sort of sales team. And I thought, I want to do something different. I'm not making the impact I used to. And I've been told for years to go and become a teacher by my career advisors at secondary school, college, and uni. And my mum had been one as well. And I went, just to shut you all up, I'm going to go and spend a day in a school. I know I won't like it. And I loved it. I loved the kind of chaotic energy and having to constantly be on the ball. And every day you felt like you were making a difference. So I sold my business. I retrained I volunteered for a bit, then trained as a TA, then did my PGCE and became a teacher. Moved up in the ranks, became a school leader quite quickly. Again, really enjoyed, especially the mentoring, coaching of people. But I was one of those people who I referred to earlier, who my priority was the people around me and my team and the children and the parents I worked with, and my self care was non-existent. And my average working week was 90 hours. And people were saying to me, you're a zombie when you aren't working. You're either asleep or you're just kind of in a bit of a daze. And in hindsight, there was lots of anxiety and depression going on, which I didn't spot at the time. Ended up on medication, walked out of school one day and had what I referred to at the time as a breakdown. It was total burnout. There was nothing left of me at all, and spent several months not being able to even sort of leave my room. And which for me, as somebody who was like, but the children and how I let people down was really quite. I never thought that would happen to me. It was something other people had. And so after that, sort of a bit of a game changer, experiencing that level of a mental health issue, I thought, well, I love the education aspects and I love coaching and mentoring, but this is something I think is really important. So I retrained in those topics and then launched a business about 5 years ago. And then it's evolved over time to become what it is now.
Gosh, I'm just
Sorry, lots in
thinking.
there. Sorry.
No. I'm yes, but I'm just imagining how dark that place probably was for you, and it's almost like, well, and I'm sure this lots of people listening will be perhaps thinking this, that you don't quite know it's got as bad as it has got until it's too late, until the walls come crashing down. And
yeah.
I'm wondering whether you were aware of any of the signs going, but you thought, oh, I'll be fine. This is what other people do. And then it sort of suddenly happened, or did it creep up on you?
There were definitely signs I was aware of, but in hindsight, I thought I'm somebody who's always, I would say, very self-aware. So for me, I was like, yeah, I know this is going on. I know I'm really stressed. I know I've got a lot of anxiety going on. And I'm making changes and trying to do something about that. In hindsight, I was aware of probably 10%, if that, of what was going on. And a number of signs and symptoms that were happening, which I just either had ignored or pushed away. Yeah, it was a real eye opener about sometimes, we think we're self-aware and perhaps in certain situations we're really not, because that's not, again, I didn't identify as somebody who was going to be derailed by stress or anxiety. That wasn't in my narrative. And so for me, it was constantly, well, no, that's not happening because I'm stronger than that. That doesn't affect, that happens to other people.
Yes, I'm not
And
that kind of person.
exactly. It took a lot to ever admit to that. And I remember it taking months, in some cases years, talking to people who I was really close to about what happened. They knew I'd been ill. That's all they knew. And it was, yeah, when I did actually open up, people were like, oh, actually, yeah, me too. A lot of people like, I've had something similar. We known each other for sort of 30 plus years and never known. So it's really interesting.
Yes. And I wonder whether because of your early relationship with food, that when you found yourself trying to look for coping mechanisms, probably subconsciously, it sort of started to build up, that was in a way your predisposition, that was already the fact, that was your Achilles heel, and that it was likely that was going to happen. Whereas perhaps for others, it might be alcohol or over exercising or something else that they use. Do you think that there is a connection there?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So I was coping throughout, 'cause it was a very long time coming, the eventual kind of crisis point. I gained a lot of weight because my coping mechanism was I will eat nothing all day and then I will do nothing but eat all evening. And I remember somebody who used to work with me seeing me not that long after I sort of recovered from what happened. You're looking really well. You know, you look very different. And it's because I got a bit of balance back. But the thing which I found quite disturbing for me was that I'm a huge comfort eater. If something is wrong, if I feel whether it's to do with lonely or bored or whatever it might be, or stressed, I go to food. And I was until it got really bad and I stopped eating. And now for me, I don't, if I get stressed, I don't stop. Some people do, some people don't. I was a don't. And someone noticed and went, I've never known you just stop food. And that for me was, okay, something's really bad here because my normal coping technique is the absolute flip side of what it has been for decades.
So that ability to understand oneself and then notice the patterns changing, of course, helps. But when we're in the thick of a pressurized environment, it's so difficult to be able to do that. And I'm just wondering whether it's helpful to sort of try and highlight some of those observations that perhaps somebody might have. I mean, that might be too much of a general question, but you know, just to try and help someone that might be before the wall crashing down and they can stop the wall crashing down.
I think it is so personal that what I do is I have people who I trust and who are very, very honest with me these days. And whether it's to do with food or something else, I will ask people, if you see me changing my habits, can you give me a heads up? Because very often we are so deep into things, we can't stop, we can't take a step back. And it's reasonably well known that when we're stressed, our normal coping techniques or the things that we know that are good for us can slip by and we go back to what we've always done before. So even with things like I do a lot of mindfulness and meditation, and if I've got a really stressful period, that can slip down a little bit. So I get people to, if they see me getting a bit snappier or a bit more short-tempered than I would normally be, to ask me, have you done much meditation recently? And it just gives me a check-in point. And do you know what? Actually, I haven't. And I've been making excuses as to why this deadline's coming. I've got this big project going on, but actually I need to go back even more there. So I have, I suppose, social barometers around me who can feed back what they know is me when I'm good, and then me when I'm like, oh, it's a bit different because I can't do it myself, or not all the time anyway.
Yes, and I suppose people can create checklists for themselves, but you know, it's the old adage, isn't it? Physician, heal thyself. It's always harder. But I guess in a way that comes back to the conversation we had a little earlier about actually asking for help, having the confidence to say, look, I have a propensity to get a bit lost. I mean, I actually say to my husband, look, if you think I am chained to my laptop, if you think I'm not taking enough breaks, can you get bossy with me? And I might turn around and say, I'm fine. And then I go, actually, he's absolutely right. To have somebody who you give permission to
Mm.
actually be so bold to say, don't you think that, is actually a really good tip, Tom, to ask for. I mean, it's a bit like asking for feedback thing, isn't it? You know, that we're not always happy doing, but I like that idea very much.
I think your point there about it can be hard. It takes it takes a lot to get there because if I think of myself a few years ago, I would never have done that because my self-image was I have to be that really strong person who doesn't need other people to do that. So I think there's stepping stones to get there. And so I learnt before I was talking to people around me, can you be that support? And vice versa, it has to go both ways. I do it for them as well. Um, I would use kind of online text lines and things like that in order to have, for me, somebody completely removed from myself, but I could have that sort of check-in period with. I've always been a big fan of. I've used a coach in some form or other since I was probably kind of, let's say, sort of 16, 17-ish, because for me it was about someone reflecting back to me, and sometimes it's just professional colleagues I would do that with. But it was, having people who, for each other, can reflect back in a safe way. But it can be hard to find people. So sometimes those stepping stones of, is there a text helpline? Is there, so I use the Beat website a lot for, or I used to, I went on a waiting list. And
And that
having a,
stands for
oh,
beats.
sorry, so Beat is eating disorder charity, and who have been fantastic actually with me. But when I was waiting sort of 6 months to be seen by the NHS, having somebody on the end of a computer screen who I didn't know but had been through a similar journey, that was really, really good for me. So I wasn't ready yet to come out as somebody who had an eating disorder to people who knew me, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah, sure. And I actually do get some people coming to me who have tried to go through the NHS route, and it's stretched. They've got 1,001, or 1,000,001 different sort of scenarios that they're trying to deal with, and I think that when somebody feels ready to change how they're eating, to change their relationship with, they don't really want to wait 6 months because they are ready there and then. And it takes, as we said earlier, it takes so much to get to that point. You then don't want to have to wait because you don't want to risk that moment disappearing and you not actually getting that help and making that progress when you feel ready for it. So actually being able to work with someone a little bit more immediately means that you can seize the momentum, can't you?
It's a hugely powerful thing because that waiting period is really hard for so many reasons. And also by the time I had seen a therapist, things had changed since the time I was assessed. So it was very different at that point. But also, as with as all types of therapy and coaching and support, I think different things work for different people. Whether it is the therapist or coach themselves, the approach they're using, the tools they're using. And the only thing I have, which I think is a downside to the NHS approach, is it's very fixed on a particular method in terms of sort of CBT, and it's quite rigid. And I struggled with their approach because my background is more sort of mindfulness, and it's quite opposite to that in many ways. And I think that for me, other approaches work better because it allows you to be more intuitive with your food. It allows you to take more control. Whereas for me, that didn't work. Other people I know being through that, it's worked really well for them. But I'm a big believer in you find the right approach and the right person for you and your situation.
Yes, and to find a coach who is flexible, who has a number of different tools that they can diagnose, if you like, what might work, and if it doesn't work, that's fine. Oh, okay, so we try another thing. Yes. So your work now, then, Tom, what's the sort of ratio of one-to-one stuff versus being in the workshop environment?
Probably, so it used to be almost all one-to-one for my first 2 years, and it gradually started shifting, and it's now probably 10% one-to-one and 90% workshop and content creation. I like doing the one-to-one still because it gives me insight. So when I'm working with a group, in my head, I can draw upon examples. Some of my clients say, feel free to use my example without my name, with a group. But with the groups, the thing that I like is the conversation between people and that connection going on. But yeah, it's mostly sort of groups these days.
So I'm thinking anyone listening who is thinking, gosh, my company could really do with upping their game on the whole well-being front. That it's a bit of a box ticking exercise, which, let's be honest, in some organizations it is. How might they get in touch with you, Tom, to go in and sort of lift their well-being?
My LinkedIn profile is normally used by most of my sort of new clients. So have a look at what my previous clients were in my reviews. So Tom Cleary Coaching comes to me quite quickly. And my website, tom-cleary.co.uk. Again, have a look at testimonials, see if the sort of thing I'm doing is working for them. Because I will be honest, I've turned down work if I think it is an HR tick box thing, because I like working with companies who they genuinely want to make a long-term difference. And me going in for an hour and that's it, is going to do quite little. But actually, one of my biggest clients, they phoned up during lockdown and they said, "We want to have you just for a half-hour lunchtime stress workshop." And I went, "As long as you're aware that we'll have to assess this and see how it works after. We think it's just going to be one-off, but we'll see." They left the door open. And they had the biggest turnout they'd had to any sort of lunch and learn of any kind. And they went, "Okay, there's clearly a need." And they then morphed into being, right, let's do a monthly workshop titled Awareness Days. Let's do video content. Let's have engagement focus groups going on. So it's companies who genuinely, the leadership teams can see we have something to do here. But I have had someone to me come and say to me, "I'm doing this because I have to. It's a tick in the box." And I said, "I am not the right person for you in that case, because I would feel bad leaving it after just that bit," if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. I'm applauding in my head. Yes. So alas, time is against us. But what I'd just like you to leave us with, is there anything that you would say to our listener who might be thinking, "Oh, well, I probably should see if I can get some help for the way I am around food, or the way I'm using food to manage my life," and is a bit reluctant? What would you say to them?
I think can you find somebody to help you take the first step and be brave in talking? So it might not even be that you talk to them straight away about this issue, but it might be about, can you go a bit deeper in your conversation and be a bit vulnerable? And when you feel safe with that, then you can do that. Because I think the first step, often before a professional or a coach, is, can I just talk to somebody in my life about little bits of this? And it may not even be the closest person to you. That might be a little bit too scary. So a lot of my clients, I've said, can you find somebody that you think you could just deepen the connection with and allow yourself to do that? And then you have someone you can reflect and get some support with. And actually, in one of my clients recently, that person they opened up to was a person who then went with them to the GP the first time. So it's just getting that support. And I say this as somebody who's a massive hermit, massive introvert, and often people I find quite difficult. So it is, for all of us, it's finding the right person that we can open up to.
Oh, Tom, thank you so much. It's such an interesting conversation. I felt like we could carry on talking for a long time. And
pleasure. Thanks, Laurie.
Maybe we'll come back and talk about dating and falling in love, because I'm sure it's very fascinating.
I would love that.
But yeah, okay, well, that's a date then. Oh, Tom, thank you very, very much. And thank you for listening. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do follow, and then you'll get all the updates of my mindful meets and also my mindful moments, which are just quite spontaneous, actually, head emptying episodes about a number of different topics whenever I feel like it. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.